Hello and welcome to the British Chambers of Commerce webinar on the Middle East. My name's Sarah Hildersley and I'll be chairing the webinar today on behalf of the British Chambers of Commerce. This webinar series has been put together by the British Chambers to help companies that are aware of opportunities in high growth markets but may not be aware of what the latest developments are and how to access those opportunities. So we've put together a panel of experts on the Middle East today who will be briefing you about those developments. And we'll be hearing from Peter Cook, who's based in the British Chambers of Commerce in Qatar, Chris Innes-Hopkins from the Saudi British Joint Business Council, Joe Hepworth, who's CEO of the British Chamber for Business based in Dubai, and Martin Hall, who heads the Kuwait British Business Centre. So before we start, we've put you all on mute just so that we can hear all the speakers easily. If you have questions, please pop them into the question box. We'll be taking those towards the end. If we run out of time towards the end on questions, we will ask our speakers to let us have a response and we'll get those to you. So the webinar will be recorded today, so there's no need to take notes, and we'll be uploading it onto the British Chambers of Commerce YouTube channel very shortly. So first of all, I'd like to ask Joe Hepworth to give us the Middle East regional overview. Joe.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and hello to everybody in the UK. The reason you've got four of us here rather than just one of us doing a regional overview is because the markets in the Middle East are very different and require an individual approach. There is a common language, religion and culture unifying the GCC markets, but everything is quite separate. I mean, some of the other common themes that you will see here, clearly the majority of trade here has been funded through energy exports, and despite recent drops in the oil price, there's a lot of surplus that can still be deployed. Because of that, or despite that, there's a drive throughout the region to diversify economies. Infrastructure is being built at a rapid pace, and there's a large drive through all of that to increase private sector employment opportunities for locals. I think that's particularly the case in Saudi, but it's certainly a pan-Gulf theme. Another common theme is very much that they're all very pro-British. British companies tend to do well here. British expertise is widely is held in high regard, and British companies can thrive here. They're very Anglophile nations. The other thing that you'll hear from all of us is that it's a face-to-face market. Emails might get an answer, but what they like is you coming here, doing business here, establishing here, getting to know them, they can get to know you, which shows a real commitment and presence and permanence in the market. And I think all of those things are common across all four markets and perhaps elsewhere in the Gulf as well. That's the start and the overview from me. I'm due to hand over to who's next. It's Peter in Qatar with Wallace there, so I'll leave you to him.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. I've got about 4 or 5 minutes, I think, quickly to run through the next couple of slides, really just to tell you why you should be doing business in Qatar. I'm sure it applies to other markets you've heard, but I think it's particularly relevant here. Qatar is immensely wealthy. They have a huge appetite to spend, and I think it's important that, as other markets around the world are stagnating and are suffering from more austere economic times, it would be natural to look at where the economies are growing and where the appetite to engage is increasing. The figures on the slide you can see are quite clear. They set out a pretty impressive set of numbers. These are just really the headlines, but it I think underlines the fact that it's not all about the World Cup. There's lots going on. The business is booming here, has been for a number of years, is likely to continue up to and beyond 2022. That I think is certainly the plan. The National Vision Qatar 2030 sets out the national investment program all the way up to 2030, and so it's clear that there is going to be a significant turnover of business over the next 15 years or so. I think the other part that this slide's trying to capture is please don't take everything you read in the press as the only truth. I think if you were to ask business people out in Qatar, that the negative press you've been getting is only a fraction of the picture. There are many businesses being very successful out here, many businesses who have set up, who have found the market to be profitable for them. And I think it gives a little bit of the balance to the picture that sometimes appears back in the UK press. If we could perhaps examine some of the sectors that are doing really well to really emphasize the point, it's not all about the World Cup. There's a number of particular sectors which leap out. Infrastructure is particularly strong. Yes, they're building stadiums and they're building fan zones and fan parks, but they're putting together a whole package of transport infrastructure, new airports, new ports. They're looking at a new metro system, a new national rail network. They're looking to develop in education and training. They're looking at healthcare, security, retail. And these are just, I think, really the headline ones. I think just about every sector there is quite a dynamic approach happening. And we would want to encourage people of all sectoral interests to look at the Qatar market. And that's something which I think the Chamber would be very pleased to do. So if it's a particular interest in a smaller niche area, please do contact us and we try and give you some key stats, some key information which may help you determine whether this is a place you would like to come and do business. I think the general message is that whilst the headline sectors are doing so well, all the other sectors that are kind of under those are equally successful. There isn't a slide big enough to capture it all, but I wanted to try and give you the headlines here. I think in terms of how you approach a market and the kind of do's and don'ts part, there's a very simple kind of part to this, which kind of underlines some of the messages which I think Joe mentioned earlier on. Qataris are very interested in meeting the individual. It's much more a human kind of engagement than we would understand it in perhaps Western markets. We talk about it as face mail rather than email, but it's very much the nature of the way they like to work. You can see some of the other advice that we offer. There are challenges here. The bureaucracy is pretty awful, and that's why it's really good to have a Chamber on the ground to try and help you with that. There are some delays in getting your paperwork done, getting payments made. Everyone gets paid in the end, but we need to help you try and navigate your way through it so that you're not caught up in that, and there are ways in which we can advise and guide you for that kind of process. And time is a more difficult concept. Everything goes slightly slower here than you would expect or want, and that's something which we would encourage you to get used to adapt. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I think that would be an important part of the preparation for entering this market, is to get some of these cultural elements understood and clear in your mind so that none of this is a surprise and a shock later on. But I mean, it really just underlines, I think, the key points from me. Qatar is a fantastic place to be looking at. I'd be surprised that you aren't looking at it, to be honest, because there's plenty of opportunities here. I think that the range of interests, it's more than just a World Cup, there's lots more going on. And it is perfectly easy to do business here. There are challenges, there are issues, there are bear traps, but you need help to navigate those. And that's exactly why the Chamber's here to help. I'm going to pass on now, I think, to Chris Innes-Hopkins in Saudi Arabia, who will probably tell you a similar bulletin about how wonderful Saudi is. Over to you, Chris.
Good. Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm sitting in snowy London, unlike my colleagues, but I was in Saudi Arabia last week, and I'm glad to say there's been a smooth succession following the death of King Abdullah, the accession of King Salman, and a whole raft of new appointments, many of which are quite promising, younger generation people coming up. I thought we'd start with the map because the thing to understand about Saudi is the sheer size of the country. It is not far off the landmass of Western Europe. You do have to decide where you're aiming for business. I mean, Riyadh, the capital, in the middle, Jeddah and Mecca on the Red Sea coast, and then we have Dammam Al-Kabar on the Gulf Coast. These are the three main centres. And the economy is growing rapidly. Obviously, the oil price will have an impact, but it will increase the pressure on diversifying the economy, and that's where the opportunities are. The other point I want to get across is it's a very young population, and 60% of population age under 25. There is a youth unemployment issue, and as has been mentioned earlier, there is a very ambitious Saudiization program which provides good opportunities for UK providers of skills, education and skills to get Saudis into the right jobs. And moving on, the next slide please. The opportunities, as you would expect, are very wide around both physical and social infrastructure. There's extremely ambitious project program. Transport, I think, is a key area at the moment. There's at least 5 metro schemes under development at the same time. We have a number of British companies involved in them. Riyadh is the most advanced, but Jeddah is going out to tender, and Mecca and also Medina. And there's a big airport development program as well. Water, as you would expect, a very big area. They have an enormous need for desalination and also water treatment, so big investments there. Healthcare is worth mentioning, a very big program to expand the hospital sector, but also demand, as I said, for training and skills in that sector, and new methods of providing healthcare services working through the private sector. There is certainly interest in that. The education budget is enormous, and we have won a number, I think up to £1 billion worth of vocational training contracts recently, with the emphasis on that area, so good opportunities there. And obviously petrochemicals, but with the emphasis on the downstream sector. There is a massive new plant being built in Sadara, it's called, on the Gulf Coast. Substantial UK engineering input through companies like AECOM and Foster Wheeler, so that a number of contracts have been won there. Moving on to the next slide, please. I think the business culture has been dealt with, and I don't need to say too much more on this, but Saudi is, as I say, a very large market, and you do need to sort of target where you want to do business. Emails, as Joe said, you don't necessarily get a response, and you shouldn't rush into doing business. Saudis do like to get to know you first as a person, and that can involve 3 or 4 visits to the market before you actually do business. Patience and persistence, I think, is the name of the game. And one sensitive issue, I know a lot of companies do start from the UAE and Dubai, and that's entirely understandable, but if you are aiming for long-term business in Saudi Arabia, really there's no alternative to setting up locally and having a Saudi dedicated approach. It is the largest market, and they do like to see signs that you are taking it seriously. A few words about the Saudi British Business Council. We are a joint council. We're part of the Overseas Business Networks initiative. Currently I'm based at the London end, but we already have a Saudi office through the Council of Saudi Chambers, and we will be recruiting our own core staff shortly to provide a range of services complementary to UKTI. But our strength is the contact network we can provide. We have 70 Saudi-based members, about 40 to 50 in the UK and growing, so all these people are prepared to give as well as to take, and please do contact me on these numbers if we can help. Over to Jono. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks, Chris. Okay, on to the UAE now. I'm sitting in sunny Dubai, and I imagine that quite a few of you have either been to Dubai on your holidays or passed through on the way somewhere further east or further south. And if you've done that, you've seen, you've probably come through on an A380 and seen the big airport, and it is a market of superlatives. I think it's fair to say that in many regards it's ahead of the rest of the Middle East in terms of its infrastructure build, in terms of operating metros, hospitals, malls, that sort of thing. And Dubai especially is now switching, that the focus is not so much on building things, rather on operating them and doing it well. That being said, every day there is still another project that's announced across infrastructure, healthcare, education, retail, because they're not stopping at the moment. But there's really, I think one of the difficulties with the UAE is that you come here as a British tourist or businessman or woman, and you see all of this amazing, all these amazing assets effectively, and you might get fooled or lulled into a false sense of security that it's going to be like doing business in the UK because it all seems so impressive and shiny and new. But it really isn't any different to anywhere else in the Middle East, and it can still be enormously bureaucratic and frustrating. Same things that Peter and Chris have said. Certain sectors do lead, aviation being one of them. Both Dubai and Abu Dhabi with Emirates and Etihad respectively have got national airlines. Both have got massive airports, and they're building even more. You've probably not heard of Fly Dubai before, but that's the Boeing 737's biggest customer. The reason for this slide is not to sort of brag about aviation, but rather just to sort of distill down from all the big picture stuff down to what it means for a British SME. Every time an A380 is brought in by Etihad or Emirates, and Emirates has got about 150 on order, there's 200 additional staff that Emirates will hire to fly and to support that plane. So there's 200 additional personnel, 200 additional families that coming into the UAE who need healthcare, education, retail, entertainment, and that's how the city grows. And that's really where the opportunity is for British firms. It isn't, when you see these big contracts being announced, they very quickly distill down into opportunities for companies like yours at bite-sized, digestible chunks to support the whole population growth and the advancement of a country and of a number of big cities within it. Next slide, please. And that sort of in a way is borne out by what you can see here, in that Dubai in particular, less so in Abu Dhabi, which is much more sort of government and energy dependent or dominated anyway. 95% of companies in Dubai are SMEs, and SMEs make up just under 50% of GDP and employment. Dubai SME there that you can see, they're actually my landlord. I'm sitting in with Dubai SME here, and they're a government agency that has responsibility for improving and advancing the SME sector in the Emirate of Dubai. So it's taken seriously here, be it local Emirati SMEs or international UK SMEs, and there is effectively a sort of a legislative infrastructure to help with that. Next slide. So what we're doing at the BCB, like I mentioned, I'm sitting here in the Dubai government building, and with UKTI we've developed with Dubai government a very particular model to help British companies come into the UAE, get you set up and underway here. So we have effectively an export incubator whereby you come in with us, you get a trade license here which gives you local credentials and the ability to tender for a lot of things. We hold your hand for 12 months. We take away some of the bruises and frustrations that are normally the case and a lot of the costs that are normally the case, getting you that fast-track trade license, working with Dubai government, getting you underway. Through the British Business Group network, we help you network and facilitate introductions and point you in the right direction. So your first year in market is spent productively and commercially rather than frustratingly and bureaucratically, which can often be the case when you're setting up here. Our relationship with UKTI is excellent. Before I was sitting with Dubai government, I was sitting with the British government in the embassy, and we complement each other. And often the path to the BCB is from having done UKTI sort of introductions, OMIS reports and things. After having verified the market, you may then come to the BCB to actually then get into the market, and that's what we do. Next slide. And I think that's it from me. Contact details, website, Twitter, obviously email and LinkedIn. Very keen to hear from any of you who are interested, and thanks for your time today. And over to Martin in sunny Kuwait now.
Thanks very much, Joe. Yeah, I am here in sunny Kuwait, but like Joe, we're currently based, like Joe was, we're currently based out of the British Embassy because I started and Kuwait started on this program a little after the other three guys. So we're a little bit behind where they are, and currently it's only me. We're based, as I said, at the embassy, and their Wi-Fi is terrible, so I'm actually at home at the moment. So what you can see behind you is my house. I think it's fair to say that Kuwait's probably the quiet man of the four markets that you've heard about, and probably the one that you need to know the most about, because you may not have been through Kuwait like you might have been through Dubai. You probably haven't been on holiday here. And this slide really is to tell you, what do you really know about Kuwait? Now, the answer to that is, if you've been to Doha or if you've been to Dubai, then it's very similar. It's not very different at all. You know, Kuwait is like driving their boats around on the weekend, and there's a very nice marina. They like shopping. That's a picture on the top right of the Avenue Shopping Centre. They go out on a Saturday morning for a cup of coffee, and their kids ride their tricycles around. And there's even a cycling group for overweight middle-aged gentlemen in the middle that I'm actually a member of. So it's a very normal place. It's easy to establish yourself here. It's very easy to live here. I really like it. And I think you don't need to be worried that Kuwait is still like 1990 and 1991 after the invasion and the subsequent liberation. They've come a long way, and it's a nice place to be. If we move on to the next slide, this is a timeline really to tell you a bit about Kuwait's shared history with the UK. Peter talked a lot about how, I think it was Joe actually, excuse me, about the relationship that many of these Gulf countries have with the UK. Well, Kuwait started right back in 1899 when Sheikh Mubarak the Great signed the Protection Treaty with the UK. That went right through to 1934 when Sheikh Ahmed signed the first oil concession to what became BP. And 1946 when they made their first exports, again Sheikh Ahmed turned that silver wheel to release the pipeline into a British tanker that was waiting for it. And it wasn't until 1961 that Sir William Luce actually signed over Kuwait as an independent country from being a British protectorate and a supported country from the UK. In 1979, Her Majesty the Queen came to Kuwait, and this is her and the Duke of Edinburgh leaving on the Royal Yacht Britannia. Of course, I mentioned briefly 1991 and the role that the UK played in the liberation of Kuwait is still very fondly remembered by many Kuwaitis. And it really wasn't until 2006, until Saddam Hussein was finally finished off, that a lot of confidence started to come back into Kuwait. And this very small picture here is of Kuwait's tallest tower, the second tallest in the Gulf, after the Burj Al Khalifa, which wasn't built until 2007 and finished in 2011, just showing that the confidence was creeping back into the market. In 2012, the relationship again went to a new level with the UK when the Emir, Sheikh Sabah, came back to the UK for a state visit. And there is continual movement. And in 2014, the contract was awarded to build this beautiful Norman Foster designed airport and continue the progress that Kuwait's been making, very slowly, but progress nonetheless. And if we move on, Kuwait really, a bit like Doha, you've heard that they've got a lot of money. I think Kuwait is classed as the 11th richest country in the world, and there are only just over 1 million Kuwaitis, so that wealth is really concentrated within a small number of people here. And that wealth is based on oil and gas, and it's 95% of Kuwait's exports. and around 6% of the world's proven totals of oil actually reside here. But with that, only 21% of the Kuwaiti population work in the private sector, and almost a third, just over a third, of that population is under 25. So although we're seeing a low oil price at the moment, irrespective of that, in the longer term, the Kuwaiti economy is unsustainable, and they really need to do something about that, and that's diversify the economy, put in a lot of infrastructure developments, and allow the economy to move away from oil and gas. If we just move on, you'll see that some of those opportunities are represented by these pictures here. One of the solutions to diversifying the economy is actually to pump more oil to allow them to generate the wealth that means that they can eventually move away from that. And in the top, at the middle there, you'll see the brand new port that they're building up at the top of Kuwait, close to the entrance to Iraq. They're hoping that can be a brand new gateway up into the Northern Gulf and North Africa. Again, another picture of that large airport that they're building here. That's around £4 or £5 billion worth of airport there. Kuwait plans its own metro. They're a little bit behind where Dubai are and where Riyadh, I know, are moving towards, but the plans are moving forward nonetheless. And finally, this is the super hospital that they're building just north of the airport, which will have 1,200 beds in it, and is actually making good progress. It's a building site, but it's coming out of the ground nonetheless. If we just move on from there, there are some vital changes in how you actually do business here that were brought around by the new companies law in 2012. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry will now work in a one-stop shop format to deal with all the different Kuwaiti ministries that in the past you needed to go and talk to yourself. So they'll do all that work for you, and by law, if you want to form a new company with a Kuwaiti partner, that company must be formed in 30 days. Probably most exciting of all from an international perspective is the FDI law that means that you now no longer need a Kuwaiti partner to establish a business here. If you are granted the opportunity under the Kuwait Direct Investment Promotion Authority to take forward FDI, they will allow you to have 100% full foreign ownership, including tax breaks and incentives for you as a company when you choose to establish here. And if we just move on. A little bit about Kuwait British Business Centre. As I said, it's early days for us. It's still only me at the moment. But we're developing a whole suite of opportunities and products and services that will be able to benefit you if you do choose to come here. One of those is actually establishing a business centre right in the heart of the British Embassy in Kuwait City. And that's where, I know Chris talked about maybe not having a Dubai address on your calling card. Well, if you fly in from Dubai, you can use our office to then go off and start to do business with the Kuwaitis. And you can use our address to put on your business cards. You can ship your brochures and your magazines there, and you can really call it a home from home. One of the other things that we're doing with KADIPA is that we are allowed to make investor applications on your behalf. So if you wanted to become 100% fully foreign-owned business, the route to doing that is by coming through the Kuwait British Business Centre. Okay, if we just move on. I think that's it. Those are my contacts. We are just started. The website is up and running, and you're more than welcome to drop me a line with any questions that you might have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Some excellent presentations there. We're going to move on, and there's an opportunity now to ask some questions. We've had a few come through for the panelists, and so we'll kick off with one or two of those now. We've had a question, perhaps for all of you briefly, looking at online business and how prevalent is doing marketing and online business in your markets. Perhaps, Joe, do you want to kick off on that?
Sure, happy to. I think it depends what it is you're selling. I think it's absolutely vital that you have a good website. Doesn't necessarily need to be in Arabic in this market. A good English website will suffice, because I think the average of 4 mobile phones per head in the UAE or something ridiculous like that. What I would say though about if it's B2C stuff, if it's retail and consumer stuff, shopping's a national pastime. People love going to shops. So they might see it on the website, but the chances are they'll still want to go and touch it and feel it and buy it from the store. So I think there is that sort of issue with for e-com here that you don't see as much sort of uptake of retail type e-com because of that issue. People just like to go shopping.
Yeah, can I just add something from Saudi perspective? There is really prolific use of social media. I think Saudi Arabia is the most connected country in the world for Twitter. They have also 2.2 mobiles per head of population. So if you can build in a digital marketing strategy to your approach, then that's well worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Moving on perhaps to another question, guys. So a couple of people have asked about the security situation, whether that's had any impact on doing business in your part of the Middle East. It's something that often crops up from our companies. And perhaps Martin and Peter, do you want to touch on whether it's had any impact, i.e. the situation in Syria and Iraq at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, Kuwait's probably the closest neighbour, well, it is a neighbour to Iraq, so probably the person that you would turn to first. And the answer is no. We've got British companies coming all the time. I speak very regularly to some of the guys from the British military mission that train up all of the Kuwaiti armed forces here, and they all tell me that they feel safer in Kuwait than they would do on the streets of London. So we don't see any of the problems here that people read about or potentially see on TV and make them worry. So it seems to be fine.
I think Martin said it rather neatly. The impression that you get from talking to people is that they feel a lot safer on the streets of Qatar, on the streets of the other Gulf states. I think if we look back in the UK, crime is very low. The incidence of other security issues, terrorism, etc., is pretty low. I think in the Gulf states. I think you would get that message from pretty much any businessman you spoke to. So I wouldn't want people to go away with the impression that the security was an issue that should hold them back. It's always one that you should, ask people, talk to people. So asking the question is the right thing to do. But the sense I have is that it's certainly not live, certainly not a current worry for most of the people that are here already.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question perhaps for Joe and Chris, potentially, from female business owners or those that are coming out on business. How straightforward is it for them to do business in your respective markets? Perhaps, Chris, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Sarah?
How feasible is it, or how straightforward is it for female business owners to do business in your market? Is it possible to visit, and how would they go about it in Saudi?
Okay. Yeah, it is fairly straightforward. The main issue is you do need a visa in advance, unlike the other Gulf markets. I mean, it is an online process, but if you're a first-time visitor, it is normal to have a Saudi sponsor, and by that I mean a Saudi business that you want to visit. They will provide the necessary invitation and put that online so that you can then go to the Saudi embassy to get your visa, or actually I would suggest to use a visa agent is the easiest. But once you're there, the great thing about Saudi is because of the, unlike other Gulf markets, 2/3 of the country are Saudis, 1/3 are foreign nationals. It's very easy to get to know Saudi people and Saudi business partners. The problem is they don't like fixing appointments far in advance. You send an email, say you're on the way, make sure they're in the country, but you might not get the specific time of appointment until you actually land. You've got to be pretty flexible in that.
Joe, do you want to touch on how female business owners can do business in the UAE?
Sure. The same as you would in the UK, and I'll leave it at that. There's no impediment or issue.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I think we've looked at a lot of the bigger opportunities in all your markets, but would you say that for SMEs there's still still possible, still straightforward to do business in your markets? A lot of the opportunities are very huge, and some of the projects are enormous, and clearly the bigger companies are more capable of navigating those business issues. But is it possible for SMEs to look at your markets and do business? That's Peter. Do you want to kick off on that?
Gladly. I mean, the short answer is yes, of course. Indeed, I think SME development is the area that we would like to see grow fastest in Qatar. The milestone is already here. But they're looking to develop supply chains and looking to find wider sources of goods and services. So I would certainly want to encourage SMEs to look at the market. I think the challenge for an SME is not to be put off by some of the frustrations, some of the bureaucracy, some of the delays it takes to get processes launched. I think the perception can often be that it's very difficult to do business here. And I think that often discourages people who should persevere, who should give it a little bit longer. And that's exactly why I think the government has set up this initiative to try and help put more support networks and more expertise on the ground, like chambers of commerce, like business centres. Try and help the SME particularly prepare best for this, to try and address some of the cultural issues before you arrive, get to your manage expectations to a degree, so that people are ready to try and navigate their way through the system, such that they can get quickly to profit, quickly to the point where they're successful. So if anything, I think the fact that we're talking today, the fact that we're here is evidence that SMEs should come here. This is the support network that's trying to make it easier for you and trying to get you to success all the quicker.
Great stuff. Joe, would you like to take that question?
If you don't mind, Sarah, I'll just add to that.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I was just going to say that we had an oil and gas trade mission here only last week or the week before, and things that are made in Great Britain go down very well, certainly in Kuwait, probably across the rest of the markets that are talking today. And whether those are valves or nuts and bolts or pipes or leather goods from a retailer or education and training courses or hospital care or medical facilities. Kuwaitis certainly are prepared to pay a bit more for the British brand names that they want, that they see, that they travel backwards and forwards to the UK for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Martin. Joe, would you like to pick up on that point about SMEs?
I think I'm sure I mentioned it on my presentation. I think that Dubai is an SME economy and that there's infrastructure and legislation in place to foster and improve that. Obviously, what we're doing with the BCB is all about helping British SMEs specifically make the jump in. It still can be an expensive and difficult market to access, so that the BCB is here to provide a low-risk bridgehead into it. I think the other thing is, like you mentioned, there are all the big companies here, the HSBCs and the Shells and the BAE Systems, and I think probably common with the three others, we've got a good relationship with these big companies to help sort of join up supply chains. They've got a natural goodwill towards what we're doing and wanting to foster British SMEs in market. And I think that's something that we can all do is help. If you want to speak to Carillion in the Dubai or Shell in Doha, that's something that we can do with the various schemes that we're working on to help the SME do well.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, perhaps just add, Sarah, I think using a trade mission is quite a good way to go on a first visit to Saudi, because then you will have the program arranged, you meet a whole network of contacts, decide whether it is the market for you. For example, next week I'm travelling to Al-Kabar in Eastern Province, and there's 45 British companies there for Saudi British Energy Week, which will give them unique access into Saudi Aramco and some of the main Saudi corporates there. So that's will be repeated next year as well, I hope.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Chris. We've got a fairly specific question that's just come in, which relates to the defence sector. Perhaps, Chris, you can respond to that. It's whether you can help with the issue of dual use or non-lethal security product exporters, or would that have to be handled in the UK? Chris, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, we can advise on civil security, things like sort of access control for buildings, that sort of sector. But if it has a sort of military or defence application, we would advise you to contact UKTI or the DSO, Defence Sales Organisation, person in the embassy in Riyadh, and I can provide details of that person if anyone needs.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that probably wraps it up for today, everyone. We've got a few more questions, but we'll ask our speakers to respond to those in writing if we may, as there's some quite detailed answers that are required of those. Just a reminder that the presentations will be available on the British Chamber's YouTube channel very shortly, and we'll be sending you the links for that. If you should require any information on these markets in the future or on the other high growth markets, you'll find a lot of information on exportbritain.co.uk. That'll put you in touch also with your local Chamber of Commerce. Right across the UK we have 52 accredited UK chambers, all ready and available to help you with advice and assistance and contacts for your international markets. We hope that the webinar has been really useful for you today. If you have any further questions, do just get in touch with us. And furthermore, if you are in London next week, we've got a flagship British Chambers of Commerce annual conference taking place on the 10th, which has some of the UK's political and commercial leaders present, and it's really well worthwhile attending that if you can. So thank you very much to all our speakers as well, to Joe, Chris, to Martin and Peter. Thank you very much for your input today. That's been fantastic, and we'd like to thank you very much for joining our webinar today.